It's great to be with you all again. This has been exciting for me. It's been fun to kind of stay involved in the camp community in this way and participate in these webinars and walk with you as you've looked a little bit at the Bible study text for the summer to kind of struggle through some of the text with you, to hear some of your questions, and it's been a lot of fun so far for me. And so today, we are going to be heading into the next season of the church here, and we find ourselves currently in the season of Lent, and of course Lent finds its climax and its fulfillment in the Easter story. And so it's very exciting that we get to look at the joy of the resurrection. And so as we look at the Easter and Easter season, we turn to the text from John chapter 18, or John chapter 20, excuse me. So why don't we go ahead and turn there, John chapter 20, verses 1 through 18, and let's get the text in front of us. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." Then Peter and the other disciple set out and went toward the tomb. The two were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent down to look in and saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came following him and went into the tomb. He saw the linen wrappings lying there, and the cloth that had been on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen wrappings, but rolled up in a place by itself. Then the other disciple, who reached the tomb first, also went in, and he saw and believed. For as yet they did not understand the scripture, that he must rise from the dead. Then the disciples returned to their homes. But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb. And she saw two angels in white, sitting where the body of Jesus had been lying, one at the head and the other at the feet. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "They have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." When she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you looking for?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Hebrew, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said to her, "Do not hold on to me, because I have not yet ascended to the Father, but go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them that he had said these things to her. This is the gospel of the Lord. What a great text as we get into this, keeping in mind that the previous day's Bible study is from the previous chapter. It's from John 18 and 19. And so it's great that we're staying in the book of John as we move into the text for today. And it's got a lot of richness for us as we look at this. But we're going to look at the idea of Easter a little bit first. So as we think of Easter and we think of the word Easter, we looked at all the different terminologies from the other words from the different seasons. Easter is actually an Anglo-Saxon word, and it's from the word that means the goddess of the dawn. And so there was a festival to this goddess that was usually in the month of April. And as with some of the other festivals throughout the year, this was reinterpreted by Christians. And so they took this old festival, this old time of worship from the Anglo-Saxon tradition, and they use this to talk about the resurrection of Jesus and to talk about Easter. Of course, Easter predates all of that, but that's where the term comes from. And the word that we use now for Easter is actually from this old Anglo-Saxon word. It's a little strange, actually. As we talk about it in our church year and the way that we structure time, we've talked about the idea of kairotic time, the kairos moment. Time is a cycle. Right? We've talked about this, that it's not linear time, chronology, or chronos time, but it's kairos time. It's living in God's time. When we think about living in the rhythm of God's time, we really think of every Sunday as a little Easter. And so when we think of Easter, it's what actually structures our week. It structures our worship life. So thinking of each Sunday, we're celebrating the resurrection. And then we celebrate it in a big way on the day that we call Easter during the church year. So every Sunday is a little Easter, and this is the way that we structure our week. We think of the God-given structures of time and the way that in Genesis 1, time is structured, right? God creates the earth in 6 days, and on the seventh day, God rests. Well, the seventh day is the Sabbath, and God makes it holy, and this is the day that we observe for resting. However, Jesus didn't rise from the dead on the Sabbath. He rose on the first day of the week, which would have been Sunday. The Sabbath is Saturday. So we talk about Sunday as the resurrection day. And we reinterpret the Sabbath for Sunday. And we say, now this is going to be our day of worship. And so Sunday becomes a particularly Christian way of celebrating the resurrection of Jesus, the day after the Sabbath, the first day of the week. And so we'll talk about that as we continue on here. But as you think about the cycle of God's time and of living in God's time, think about the 7 days of the week. And each week we are celebrating another Easter. We are celebrating the resurrection anew, and we are going through the rhythm of the day of the week as we go to our work and as we go to our play and do all those things, and then we come to Sunday, and it's our day of rest. It's our day of worship. It's our gift from God. We talk about as Christians being resurrection people, and this is a great term as we think of what it means to be Christian, what it means to live in the light of Christ, in the light of Easter. We are a resurrection people. We talk about the theology of the cross. We talk about the theology of the cross, though, on this side of the resurrection. That means that we see the cross even through the eyes of the resurrection, knowing what comes next, knowing that this is redeemed by Christ. And so we talk about us being a resurrection people. This is an Easter theme. So in Easter terms, as we talk about living in God's time, living in God's time means seeing the world as redeemed. It is a lost world. It's a world that sometimes seems God-forsaken. We talked last time when we talked about Lent as God being in those particular moments of God-forsakenness. That is where God is found because of the cross. Through the lens of the cross and through the lens of Easter and the resurrection, we see this fallen, broken world as redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, as redeemed, as lifted again to new life. What a beautiful way of seeing this. So key Easter themes. We talk about the defeat of death. 1 Corinthians chapter 15 talks about the resurrection, this beautiful chapter about the resurrection. We talk about death. Where is your sting? Death is no more. Death does not have the final word. We know that in the cross, Jesus did die, but that is not the end of the story. We as Christians proclaim, no, that's not the end. There is the resurrection. We talk about Easter as the vindication of the way of Jesus. So when you think of the way of Jesus, the way of the cross, the way that Jesus walked to the cross, the way of peace, the way of love, this is the way that Jesus lived his life. He did not fight back. He did not try to usher in the messianic kingdom right now in this world in a temporal setting. The way of Jesus is the way of the cross. And in the resurrection, the way of the cross is vindicated. And so even the disciples that were like, we thought he was the Messiah. We thought this was going to be the one to redeem Israel. And yet he died. He was crucified. How could this possibly be? And through the resurrection, we see that this way of life is vindicated. And so really the gospel message starts with, he is risen. That is the gospel. That is the beginning of the good news. And without it, there would be no good news. We would not be able to see the cross as we see it without the resurrection. And so when I think about theology of the cross, as I think of Easter themes, I think of the Protestant cross. There is a reason that our cross is the empty cross. If you go to a Roman Catholic church and some other churches, sometimes you'll see a crucifix with Jesus hanging on the cross. It's a focus on Jesus' suffering and on the wounds of Jesus. When you go to a Protestant church, and almost every Lutheran church, you see a cross, maybe with a piece of cloth draped over it or something like that, but otherwise it's empty. Jesus is no longer there. He is no longer on the cross because Jesus is risen. And so there's this beautiful image of the empty cross. So as we talk about the word for the day, we've talked about words for the day for every one of our texts so far and of our Bible study themes. We've talked about hope. We've talked about love. We've talked about all these different themes, and now the word for the day is joy. This unimaginable joy that bubbles up within us at the knowledge of the resurrection, at the knowledge that death, this finality of death, does not have the last word. And the phrase for the day, of course, is Jesus is risen. Have them shout it out. So as we talk about on the first day of the first Bible study, that Jesus is coming, and as we talk about the second day, Jesus is here. As we talk the third day, that Jesus is with us in our suffering. Jesus suffers with us, and proclaim that out loud. Now we proclaim this truth of the Christian gospel, that Jesus is risen. And maybe we respond with, he is risen indeed, alleluia. This is our message as Christians. This is why Easter is one of the most popular worship services to go to, because we are resurrection people. We love celebrating the resurrection. And at camp, a place full of joy, what a wonderful place to celebrate the resurrection. To celebrate the resurrection. Let's get into the text. So as we look at John chapter 20, this is a wonderful, wonderful text. Perfect for what we're talking about as far as the Easter message. And of course, there's resurrection stories in all four of the Gospels. This one is very particular. So let's look at the individual pieces that we see here. So John chapter 20, the first thing that we see is the person who's there, Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene in every one of the Gospels, all four Gospels. She is the first witness of the resurrection. The four Gospels, they disagree on a lot of individual things. They disagree about a lot of the details of Jesus' life. There's a few things, though, that the four Gospels all agree on, and this is one of them, interestingly enough, that Mary Magdalene is the first person to witness the resurrection of Jesus. And I think this is significant as we talk about what does it mean to be a disciple, as we talk about the role of women in the church, and as we talk about the special role of Mary Magdalene. So she obviously has a very special place in the resurrection stories. As I look at John chapter 20, verses 1 through 18, that is, I see it in two scenes. I see scene 1 as the empty tomb, and I see scene 2 as the resurrection appearance to Mary. And I think it's important to see these as distinct because there are different themes that go on here, and there's different ways that we can connect the young people to this story through these different scenes. So scene 1, the empty tomb. This is verses 1 through 10. Mary Magdalene is going to the tomb, and this is the first day of the week. So this is after Holy Saturday, right? Jesus is crucified on Good Friday, and then the Sabbath happens, and everybody is at home resting, and that's Saturday. And so they can't go and anoint his body with spices. They go on Easter morning. And here it's just Mary that goes. In the other Gospels, she's usually with other women. She goes to visit the tomb early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark. Now it's important, as you think of this, it's still dark. It's before dawn. This is a beautiful image as we think about the resurrection as the dawn breaking forth in the world and the light breaking forth in the darkness. It's still dark when she's going to the tomb. The Sabbath would have ended at sundown on Saturday. And so the first day of the week actually started on sundown. She comes early in the morning, sometime in the middle of the night, before the sun rises. She arrives at the tomb, and the stone has been rolled away. How can this be? What is she to make of this? She goes immediately. She doesn't go in. She doesn't investigate. She sees the stone has been rolled away, and she panics. She runs back to tell the disciples, and this is this cool scene with Peter and the beloved disciple. Peter and the beloved disciple are the only two that the story talks about running to the tomb. So you got Mary. She sees the empty tomb. She runs back to the disciples, tells them. They run to the tomb. There's this urgency. The beloved disciple, they're running together, but it says the beloved disciple is faster, and he actually outruns Peter. He makes it to the tomb first, but he doesn't go in. And you can kind of see his hesitancy. He sees the linen wrappings, and he's kind of surveying the scene. He's the detective here. What's going on with this? Why is the tomb rolled away? And he's ready to do a forensic study. Peter, though, he plows right in. He goes for it. He dives right into the tomb, and he sees the linen wrappings. He sees what's going on. He sees that the body's missing. He doesn't know what to make of it. And then, after Peter goes in, the disciple whom Jesus loved, the beloved disciple, walks in. And it says, look at this. The other disciple reached the tomb first, went in, and he saw and believed. He saw and believed. The empty tomb is the way that he goes from unbelief to belief. This is the sign for him of the resurrection. The empty tomb is all he needs to understand Jesus' message in life, that I will be resurrected on the third day. The beloved disciple believes. So let's look at this a little bit, because I love the idea of the evidence that he finds here. Because we see that there are the linen wrappings are lying there. And then it says that the cloth that had been placed on Jesus' head, it's not lying at the same place as the linen wrappings, but it's all rolled up and it's folded up. It's in a nice place all by itself. What does this mean? Because the original idea, when they get to the tomb and they see that the stone has been rolled away, what's the first assumption? That the body has been stolen, right? Somebody has taken the body of my Lord. Who's taken it? What's going on here? But as the beloved disciple enters, he says, wait a minute. Why are the grave clothes still here? Why is the shawl that goes around the face all folded up nicely and rolled up over there? What is happening? It's not that somebody has carried Jesus away. Jesus has left death behind. Do you see the image here? Jesus has left the tomb behind, but he has also left behind his burial shroud. Jesus has left death behind. What a wonderful image here. And the beloved disciple gets it. I'm not sure that Peter gets it right now, because later on, it's not part of our Bible study text, but later on, the disciples are hidden behind locked doors. Do they really believe? Do they really believe that Jesus was resurrected? Not quite sure about that. But here it says, the beloved disciples saw and believed. As we think about the reactions to the resurrection, the reactions to the empty tomb, how do we respond? How do our campers respond? We have different personalities, different ways of responding to this. We need different amounts of evidence. Is the empty tomb enough for us? Are the grave clothes rolled up enough for us? What do we need to convince us that Jesus really has been raised from the dead? For Mary, as we see in the next part of the Bible study text, Mary stands outside the tomb weeping. It says the disciples go home. They run back home. Who knows what they're doing? They're plotting, they're planning, they're trying to figure out what this means for them. Maybe they're arguing about whether he's been resurrected or not. Who knows? We're not told that, because we stay at the tomb. We linger at the tomb with Mary. She's there and she's weeping. Notice that she's weeping. It's Easter morning, people, and she's weeping because her Lord is dead, and this is her understanding. And so part of this day, always, part of the resurrection is understanding the cross. We can never see the resurrection except through the cross. We can never ignore the cross and say the cross doesn't matter, the crucifixion doesn't matter because of the resurrection, right? The cross definitely matters. We are theologians of the cross. We are theologians of the empty cross. So let's take a look at what Mary Magdalene's doing. So she looks in the tomb, and she doesn't see the grave clothes lying there, right? She sees the angels. This is kind of cool. I mean, it's like, were the angels there the whole time? And the beloved disciple and Peter, they just didn't see the angels? Is that what happened? Or the angels just appear now? Does it depend on our amount of faith? Like, how is she seeing them, but the disciples didn't? So Mary sees these two angels in white, and they say, "Hey, what are you crying for? Woman, why are you weeping?" And she says, "They have taken away my Lord. I do not know where they have laid him. They've stolen his body." Right? She's still thinking that I have come here to care for the body of my Lord, and I can't do it because somebody stole his body, and that's terrible, as I grieve the loss of my Lord. And then she's so filled with grief that even when Jesus himself comes and stands before her, she doesn't recognize him. And he says, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you looking for?" He knows full well who she's looking for, right? He knows full well what she is seeking. He knows what all of us are seeking. And yet it stands right in front of us. Sometimes the very thing that we're looking for is standing right in front of us. Jesus is standing right in front of us in the flesh, and we don't even see him. How are we given eyes to see? How are we given eyes to see? The resurrection story tells us. Look at this. This is a beautiful text. Don't miss this. She says, "Sir, they've carried him away. Tell me where you have laid him. I will take him away. I'm going to take care of him." And then Jesus speaks to her. And he doesn't just speak to her. He calls her by name. And he says, "Mary." And it's when he says her name, when he calls her by name, that her eyes are open and she recognizes him. What a beautiful image. And this harkens back to John chapter 10. Again, we're talking about the good shepherd. I know my sheep and my sheep know me. I call my sheep by name. And they listen to my voice. Here is the good shepherd calling one of his beloved sheep by name. And she recognizes him for who he is. This is a special individual calling that is so special for each one of us. Consider this. Jesus knows you by name. Jesus calls you out by name. And in his naming you, your eyes can be opened to the resurrection. We move on to this next part. Jesus, in verse 17, this is kind of an interesting verse. He says, "Do not hold on to me. Don't hold on to me. Don't hold on to this corporeal flesh, because I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." The importance of the ascension. Don't miss this part, because as we think of the ascension of Jesus, this is, in the Gospel of John and in our faith as well, the culmination of Jesus' life. Jesus has been risen from the dead, but he doesn't stay here as a resurrected body. He ascends to heaven. He ascends to be with the Father. He is reincorporated into the Trinity. And it's Jesus' corporeal body, the human body, the incarnation that we talked about on Christmas Epiphany. It is this body that has experienced the suffering of the cross, who has taught here on this earth. This is the person who is then assumed up into heaven, ascended to be with the Father. This is salvation history. As Jesus goes to the Father, Jesus brings all that he is into the life of God. And so Jesus says, "Do not hold on to me, because I am now going to the Father, my Father and your Father, my God and your God." It becomes ours. God is ours, and we are now children of God by virtue of our adoption through the flesh of Jesus Christ. This is powerful stuff, you guys. This is powerful stuff. My Father and your Father. I go to prepare a place for you, Jesus told the disciples at the Last Supper. I go to prepare a place for you, and I will send you the advocate. And we'll talk about that next time we're together. We'll talk about that in the last days Bible study as the Holy Spirit comes upon us, and the advocate who is here with us, empowering us in our day-to-day lives. And so it's the ascension of Jesus into heaven. Beautiful, beautiful text. And don't miss this last verse. Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples. The resurrection means that it's an encounter that leads to sending. We don't just wallow in joy. We don't just sit there and are sitting there ecstatic for our whole lives. Think about the camp experience. Think about the ups and downs of camp. Some people think that camp is all about smiles and happiness and joy, and there's a lot of that. We do a lot of fun things at camp. We also attend to people suffering at camp. And the joy that we experience in community, the joy at knowing Jesus' resurrection, we then go out with that joy into the world. And so you think of Mary's encounter with Jesus leading to the sending. And as we talk about this on probably the second to last day of camp, a lot of people do this Bible study on Thursday. We talk about this as the day before we're going home. We're encountering Jesus here, the resurrected Christ. And now, how are we going to go tell that story to others? The resurrection leads into Pentecost. The resurrection leads into the proclamation. The encounter leads to sending. Don't miss that part of it. If you want to keep going, especially with high schoolers, I'd encourage you. The rest of the chapter is wonderful. It's the Jesus' appearance to the disciples, and they're afraid. He says, "Peace be with you." They touch his hands and his feet, and then they believe that it's him. But Thomas isn't there, and Thomas wants to see too. And after he sees and touches, he also believes. And he makes the proclamation, the great proclamation of the Gospel of John. It ends up being the climax of the Gospel of John, where he says, "My Lord and my God." Think of these different encounters with the resurrection. Think of the beloved disciple and the belief in the empty tomb. Think of Peter and his always jumping headfirst into everything and not knowing where he is, not knowing where to go, not knowing what to believe. And think of Mary, who lingers, who doesn't rush into it, who lingers beside the tomb and has this personal encounter with Jesus. There are different ways that we encounter the resurrected Christ, and this would be an interesting topic for discussion as you talk to your campers about this. As we move on, I want to mention briefly the Easter Vigil. Beautiful service. This is traditionally in the church year the first of the Easter services. It happens overnight on Easter Saturday, or the Saturday of the Vigil. So it happens after sundown, which is technically the beginning of the first day of the week, or Sunday. So since Mary went to the tomb at night, we have it at night. Sometimes it culminates in the sunrise, but there's always a service of light, and there are 12 Old Testament readings. These are just a few of them. As you think about what puts us in the mindset of the resurrection. We're talking about the promise of God. This is the God of promise who has been faithful throughout all of history, throughout biblical history. This God who is faithful is the one who came down in Jesus Christ. This God who is faithful is the one that vindicates Jesus' mission of love and peace and justice in this world through the resurrection. And so we read these texts, and these are just a few of them. As you think of Genesis 1, the creation from nothing. As Genesis 22, the binding of Isaac, when Abraham is ready to sacrifice his son Isaac at the command of the Lord, and the angel of the Lord stops him and says, "No, now I know that you truly fear God." Exodus 14, the crossing of the Red Sea, and the deliverance of the people from slavery, the central story in the Old Testament. Jeremiah 31, the new covenant with Israel. Beautiful, beautiful text. Ezekiel 37, the valley of dry bones. What a wonderful text that talks about resurrection. These dry bones, and they take on flesh, and then the breath of life goes into them, and they come alive. Daniel 3, the fiery furnace with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and God's faithfulness through that trying experience. Beautiful, beautiful text. And the story of Jonah and God's steadfast deliverance of Jonah through the belly of the fish, and ultimately God's steadfastness towards Nineveh, whom he forgives. Beautiful, beautiful text. These are some things to consider. Do you want to incorporate some of the Easter Vigil service and some of the themes from it in the camp atmosphere? I think this is a great idea, using the service of light, using some of these texts maybe to talk about salvation history and the God who has been faithful throughout history being the God that resurrected Jesus from the dead. It really is a beautiful service. So consider that. As we think of Easter images, there are some great images. These are just a few. Again, the empty cross. Use the empty cross. Talk about what it means that we use the empty cross. Jesus is no longer there. We still focus on the cross. It's still a theology of the cross. Jesus is still found in this normal, everyday suffering world and in the God-forsakenness, but Jesus has redeemed it. Jesus has redeemed even this ugly torture device of the cross has been redeemed, and somehow this becomes our central symbol of Christian worship. And so we gather around the empty cross. What a beautiful, beautiful idea. The egg, of course, is a symbol of Easter, and we're familiar with that as far as secular Easter as well. But the egg is a symbol of new life, a symbol of the tomb, something that the kids can really talk about and hold maybe, and think about what does it mean to bring life out of lifelessness. The egg, or maybe the seed, using the seed is a great imagery to use outdoors. And then the image of the lily, or the flowers of the field, the green blade that rises from the dead grass. Think about camp. Everything that's alive is a symbol of resurrection, is a symbol of Easter, the symbol of new life. Springtime, which we're even now experiencing here in March. Hopefully, we hope for it, right? We're hoping that the springtime will come, and we believe that God is faithful. And in this cycle of the seasons, God has given us visual reminders that life comes from lifelessness. What a beautiful image that we're given. Think about that as we think of Kairos time, as we think about living in God's time. What does it mean to live as springtime people, as summer people, people that are verdant and green and shining with new life, living in the light and glory of the resurrection? Beautiful, beautiful images. Use these, use other images. So what does it mean to be a resurrection people? As we close up here and as we move towards a time of questions, remember these themes that death does not have the last word. Jesus has conquered death. Walking the way of love and peace leads through the cross. This is a resurrection theme, people. The way of love, justice, and peace in the world, the way of Jesus leads to the cross. And ultimately, God has redeemed this broken and sinful state. Look for possibility of life in the midst of death. We are hopeful people. We believe that God brings life out of lifelessness. This is an Easter theme. What does it mean to live as resurrection people? It doesn't mean to always be positive or try to tell people to stop crying because it'll be okay, or maybe your friend or your parent or your dog died, but it'll be okay because you'll see him again in the resurrection. They're with Jesus now. No, it's not about that. It's not about those fuzzy feelings. It's actually the possibility that life has been conquered by death. Recognizing the significance of suffering, meeting people there in their suffering alongside them, with the knowledge that Christ has redeemed it, with an Easter hope, with an Easter joy. That's a lot different than living kind of in a glorified world where everything is okay and everything is happy and everything is awesome, as the Lego movie says, right? So we think of that. Living as resurrection people means that we live in the promise of the resurrection. That means that even as we die, yet shall we live. There's a promise of bodily resurrection. That is a beautiful promise for us, and that's something that we can hope for by virtue of Christ's resurrection. Again, I point you to 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And then we come down to it again. This was a theme of theology of the cross last week. As resurrection people, this stuff that we believe in is something worth dying for. It's something worth being passionate about. This is something worth giving your life for. Again, it's not fuzzy feelings. It's something that makes a difference in the world. And our faith, our discipleship, our action in the world makes a difference. Makes a difference. God, having redeemed the world, makes a difference in individuals' lives. You hear so many people asking those questions about Christianity. What's it for? What's the point of it? Do we even really need the church? Do we need this Christian stuff? Why can't I just live a good life and be a good person? What we believe in has cosmic significance. This is something worth dying for. And we live as resurrection people. I think specifically about dying, there are specific questions there. And what does it matter if I die or if I live? Or should I just give up on this life? And wouldn't that be better to just be with Jesus right now? And I think that's where the Mary story is important. Think about where Mary was when she encountered Jesus at the tomb. This was her Lord and Master and her best friend and the person who had reoriented her life, everything. And she is weeping outside the tomb. She is in the depths of despair. We don't know what's going through her head, but it's probably very similar to some of the things that are going through a lot of our young people's heads. Maybe I should be with him. Maybe I belong in that tomb. How can I end it? Oh Lord, please end it. As we think about Jesus meeting her there in her sorrow and grief and speaking her name, calling her name, and these young people who are going through these terrible times in their life and are wondering, maybe I should just die. Maybe it doesn't matter. Or they've lost somebody in their life and they're saying, I want to be with my father who died. I want to be with my sibling. That Jesus calls you by name. That Jesus loves you as you are and has a specific purpose for you right now in this life And that's important. And so, yes, it's worth dying for, as we say that, but it's also worth living for. And we see Mary Magdalene here getting a new purpose in life. And later on in the gospel story in John 21, we see Peter getting a new purpose in life. Feed my lambs, feed my sheep. Very important mission that Peter gets, and the beloved disciple gets as well. These are central figures here in the resurrection stories, and how do we appropriate the resurrection? How do we look at death through the eyes of new life? You're right, though. It's a great caution about death and about talking with these kids about death. We have to meet them where they're at and recognize that it's not just, yay, Jesus is alive, woo! But it's, I'm in the depths of suffering. I am weeping outside the tomb. Okay? Don't say to me, there's the burial cloth and that means Jesus is alive. I'm not there. I see an empty tomb. I see a crucified Lord and a missing body, and I don't know what to do about this right now. Meet the child there. Meet the child there and abide with them, as Jesus abided with Mary. Be with them in particular. Speak their name. Call them by name. Their particularity matters. Matters to Christ. Should matter to us. And that's why we do this thing with counselors, right? That's why we have one counselor for every 5 to 8 kids, because we want these very personal connections. We need that to happen at camp.